Hello and greetings to the all panels. To begin with a research background, Sustainable Development Goals or SDG is also known as a global goals is an universal goal of ending poverty, protecting the planet, and also ensuring all the people, including current generation and future generation, to enjoy the peace and prosperity by the year of 2030. There are 17 goals of SDGs, and one of it is Goal 11 that is about the sustainable cities and communities. Throughout this research is concentrating on the public perceptions of the impact of sustainable cities towards achieving the SDGs. The second will be the relationship between public perceptions on the impact of sustainable cities and SDGs. The third will be elaborate on the strongest predictor that influence the SDGs. All the three elements will be elaborated throughout this session.
Understanding the dimension of a sustainable city is a complex issue, since transforming an ordinary city into a sustainable city must have something that influences it as well as consequences. A larger urban population creates a higher demand for clean water, air, energy, and other vital resources, which make it difficult in sustaining the cities or reducing the negative impact on the environment. This study is focusing on the impacts of sustainable cities towards SDGs, which are reduction of carbon dioxide emission, less consumption of goods, reduction of urban temperature, and production of functional green open spaces.
Alright, moving on to research objectives and research questions. As for research objectives, there are three objectives. So one of it is to examine the public perception on impacts of sustainable city towards sustainable development goal SDGs in Malaysia. Second will be to examine the relationship between public perception on impact of sustainable cities and sustainable development goals SDGs. That will be to examine the strongest predictor that influences the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs). As for research questions, it also has three elements that are related to the previous research objectives.
This is the conceptual framework of the research. The independent variables are reductions of CO2 emission, less consumptions of goods, reduction of urban temperature, and production of functional green open spaces, while the dependent variables is the Sustainable Development Goals SDG in Malaysia.
Alright, moving on to the next segment, which is independent variables and hypotheses. For all independent variables, the null hypothesis is no relationship between the four variables toward the sustainable development goals. Meanwhile, for the alternative hypothesis, there is a relationship between the four variables toward the sustainable development goals.
The research design is quantitative methodology and a cross-sectional study. Quantitative survey is used to assist in collecting high volumes of data, while cross-sectional study refers to study undertaken in which data are gathered just once. The unit of analysis is the Malaysian citizen, which will represent the public's perceptions. The sample size is 384 respondents to represent the Malaysian population of 32.7 million people. The sampling technique is non-probability sampling technique, specifically the convenience sampling. The measurement or instrumentation. The main instrument is questionnaire, which involves demographic variable questions, 5-item scale, 36 questions from sections A until section F, and Likert scale used to analyze the data. And the data collections consists of 6 sections, which are demographic profile, sustainable development goals, reduction of CO2 emission, less consumption of goods, reduction of urban temperature, and production of functional green open spaces. The data analysis consists of descriptive statistic, normality test, reliability test, mean analysis, Pearson correlation, and multiple regression.
Alright, moving on to the next segment, which is on the findings part on demographic statistic. For the first demographic, which is on gender, so this survey has majority reached to the female, with a total number of 261 respondents, with equivalent to 67.4%. Meanwhile, for the age, the respondent with the age of in between 21 to 30 years old was recorded the highest total number of respondents with 208 respondents, which equivalent to 53.7%. As for the current living area, most of the respondents are currently live at urban area, with the total number of 155 respondents, which equivalent to the 40.1%. As for the ethnicity, majority of the respondents are among the Malay, with a total number of 442 respondents that convert with a percentage of 36.7%. By referring to the second last of demographic, which is on educational background, it was recorded that those who answered this survey is among that have a bachelor's degree, or those who are currently studying a bachelor's degree, with the total amount of 177 respondents, which equivalent to 45.7%. For the last demographic, which is on employment status, it was recorded that students are the highest who answered this survey, with the total number of 151 respondents, which equivalent to 39.0%.
Next is the main findings for Objective 1, which is to examine the public perception of the impact of sustainable city on Sustainable Development Goals. For Section B, Sustainable Development Goals, which is analyzed using mean and standard deviation, showed that item number 4 is the highest mean with 4.0620 and standard deviation of 0.68762. For reduction of CO2 emission, shows that item number 1 is the highest mean with 4.2222 and standard deviations of 0.68834. For less consumption of good, item number 1 with the highest mean of 4.1990 and standard deviation of 0.68606. For reduction of urban temperature, item number 1 with the mean of 4.2584 and standard deviation of 0.64415. And lastly, the production of functional green open spaces shows the highest mean of item number 1 with 4.2636 and standard deviation of 0.65404.
Alright, moving on to the next segment, which is on the findings for the second objective. For the reductions of carbon dioxide emissions, the Pearson correlation is 0.697 with the p-value of 0.00, which is a lower p-value of 0.05. Therefore, the null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted. Meanwhile, for the less consumptions of goods, the Pearson correlation is 0.714 with a p-value of 0.00, and the p-value is lowest than 0.05. Therefore, the null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted.
Next is the reduction of urban temperature. The analysis result shows Pearson correlation of 0.672 and p-value of 0.000, which is lower than p-value 0.05. Therefore, the null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted. And lastly, the production of functional green open spaces shows the result of 0.622 and p-value of 0.000, lower than p-value 0.05. Therefore, the null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted.
Alright, moving on to the next segment, which is still in the finding, but emphasizing on the third objective, which is on to examine the strongest predictor that influence the Sustainable Development Goals SDGs. For all the four sections, we're using a multiple regression as the mechanism tools to analyze the result to analyze the data that were gathered from the survey. Therefore, by referring for the result for the beta value from among the four predictors, it has identified that section D, which is on less consumption of goods, has the strongest predictor among the other predictors, and also it has the highest influence uh, towards the sustainable development goals.
Next is the research implication. The first one is assist in policymaking regarding sustainable city and SDG. The rapid growth of population is encouraging the policymaker to formulate policy as a fundamental in developing sustainable cities and implementing sustainable development. Policy can ensure sustainable development and conserve the environment for future generation by substituting the consumptions of natural resources as the main generator with alternative method. Second is improving education system regarding sustainable city and SDG. Education is the key to the global framework for sustainable development goals and is recognized as having one of the highest long-term returns on sustainable development investment. Therefore, integrating and framing education's role in introducing sustainable city and SDG must be explored. The third one is collaboration between government and organization. The organization's participant in local affairs has become more prevalent in discussion on local government. It is vital to comprehend how the organizations or stakeholders' interaction operates in the governance system. Although collaboration among various stakeholders is expected to contribute to achieving SDG, it isn't easy to manage how multiple activities led by different sectors can be coordinated and encouraged. And lastly is the promoting awareness regarding impacts of sustainable city in SDG. One of the challenges in achieving SDG is the lack of exposure and awareness. Only half of the Malaysian citizens are aware of the Malaysian government's vision and goal for sustainable development. Developing a more sustainable community, society, and generation will facilitate SDG that the government is trying to impose in the future.
Alright, moving on to the next segment, which is limitations and suggestions. Along the way to complete this research, it has identified that there were three limitations that were facing throughout the period of research. For the first limitations will be limited sample size. The questionnaire was conducted by online survey by using a Google form and then distributed randomly through the public by using the social media platform. It was suggested that they highly suggest that for those who are wanted or wish to have the similar research on this topic, it was advised that the future researchers has to determine the sample size that or decide the sample size that are suitable for the whole number of population in Malaysia. Alright, for the second limitation, which is on the quantitative study. So this research has used quantitative study in order to collect the respective data. By referring to this method, it has a lack of answers options that indirectly cause them to pick one that does not reflect on what they feel about on that respective questions. Therefore, it highly recommend for the future researcher, it highly recommend that they have to use still can use quantitative study, but add on the interview session as part of the next elements in collecting of data. This will help the researcher to have a bigger focus rather than minimizing on a specific detail only. Right, for the last limitation, which is on limited model. By referring to this research, it has identified that there were only 4 independent variables and only one variable that were examined. Hence, the number of independent and dependent variables were recorded as a constraint. For suggestion on this limitation, it's advised that it highly recommend that this model will be wider and comprehensive by providing more providing or offer more models and variables to further enhance the quality of the value of the independent variables and dependent variables, that which later can enable the future research to discover on the other effects of this study.
In conclusion, the purpose of this research is to study the public perceptions on the impacts of sustainable city on SDG. This research can significantly contribute to policy making, improving education system, collaboration between government and organization, and promoting awareness of sustainable cities and SDG. Therefore, an in-depth study is needed to be done to improve the limitation that has been identified and uses the suggestions that the researchers has provided. That is all from us. Thank you.